Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. You may have seen our review on the Bersa Thunder 380, and you may have, if you've looked into these guns at all, heard that it's a PPK clone. So we happen to have a PPK, we've got a Bersa 380, and we're going to kind of compare them. This happens to be PPKS, and we're going to compare the two and show you, where they're different. Really, in all reality, the Bersa 380 Thunder is not a clone of the PPK or PPKS. Though I will guarantee the designer of the Bersa had seen and probably handled a PPK or PPKS, because there are a lot of capabilities and features that are similar, but there's also quite a few differences. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing we'll do is show that the guns we're going to use are unloaded. So we've got an empty PPKS. These are both chambered in 380 ACP. And that one is unloaded as well. The magazine releases on these, because of where they're located, are a little cumbersome to use, but not that difficult. From a styling perspective, they are quite similar, and that definitely could lead you to believe that one was the clone of the other. And of course the Bersa hasn't been around as long, so if anybody cloned anybody, it would be the Bersa. From a size perspective, they're similar. The Bersa is a little bit bigger overall. 6.61 front to back for the Bersa, 6.25 front to back for the PPKS. The height of the Bersa is 4.92 inches, and it's 4.3 inches for the PPKS. And the PPKS is significantly thinner at 0.98 versus 1.35. From a weight perspective, they're a little bit closer. The PPKS is 20.5 ounces. It's all stainless steel. The whole gun is stainless steel with the exception of the grips. And I actually had that backwards. It's 22.6 for the PPKS and 20.5 for the Bersa. The PPKS is noticeably heavier because it is stainless steel, and the Bersa is a steel slide and an alloy frame. And then this particular one has rubber grips. The capacity is similar on both of them. It's 7 rounds with the standard magazines, and both of them do have an 8-round magazine available. We don't have an 8-round magazine for either one of these. This one a local viewer lent us. It came with 1 magazine. This one we had acquired a little while back. This was an inner arms version. The PPKS comes in a number of different versions. They have resumed manufacture of these, but this is one of the older ones, and it was imported by Inner Arms. And these are made in Argentina, and they're still currently made, so that both of these are available. And now with Walther resuming manufacture of the PPKS, you can get a new one shortly when they actually start to be available on the market. The pricing of them is noticeably different. The Bersa has several different variations, a couple different color combinations, and they're all in the 300-ish territory. And the PPKS is in the $700 to $800 territory for the new ones. And depending on how lucky you get and what you stumble across from a used one, you can expect to pay anywhere from $600 to a couple grand for the PPKS used, all depending on what it comes with and what kind of condition it's in. So there is a definite price disparity between them right from the get-go. And one of the primary differences that you can notice right away is this is a magazine for the PPKS, and of course it obviously goes in quite nicely. This is a magazine for the Bersa. Not going in there at all. It doesn't fit in any way, shape, or form. But it does work, of course, in the Bersa. But the PPKS magazine does not. So the magazines, though they look similar, other than this little ridge, are not interchangeable. So you wouldn't want to buy used Bersa or buy Bersa mags for one or PPK for the other. That's just not going to work the way you want it to. But beyond that, they do look quite similar. You'll see they have similar pinky extender, similar overall shape. This little ridge on the PPKS magazine is probably the most noticeable difference between them if you were looking at them sitting somewhere. And then, of course, there's a number of internal differences that we'll get to. But let's talk about some of the external or functional differences from the outside. Number one, of course, I mentioned the materials they're made from are different. Alloy, steel versus all stainless. The PPKS, of course, Bond, James Bond. If you've seen a Bond movie, you've seen one of the variations of the PPK. And he's had the 25, the 32, and a number of other ones. This gun really became popular as a result of the Bond movies, and it's one of the signature things that you look at. Whereas the Bersa is, it doesn't have any of that type of a history that goes with it. The PPKS is overall a more robust gun, especially with the stainless steel manufacturer. I would expect this to take more abuse than the Bersa probably would, but both of these have been functional. The Bersa, of course, is lighter, about 2 ounces lighter because of the alloy, and with this rubber frame, or this rubber grip, it's a little easier to get a hold of and keep it in your hand. But I didn't have any trouble with this trying to get away from me. The other thing that it has, the Bersa has much better sights. It has these nice bright 3-dot sights, and they're both front and rear dovetailed, so you could change them if you want to. The PPKS, at least the older versions, have not anywhere near as nice sights. They're a little bit harder to see. It's kind of a dot at the back and a dot at the front, which tends to disappear on the range. The rear sight is dovetailed, and you could replace it. The front sight is fixed. So the sights are probably one of the biggest differences, and in kind of a reverse pattern here, the less expensive gun actually has the significantly better sights. The other thing that the less expensive gun has that's significantly better is the trigger. This is a DASA gun, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some snap caps in both of these because the Bersa doesn't belong to us, and we have a habit of not dry firing guns that don't belong to us. And just to be consistent, even though we do on this PPKS, I'm going to put snap caps in this one as well. So we'll start with the Bersa. Put magazine in, chamber the snap cap, and for those that aren't familiar with snap caps, they're inert dummy rounds to protect the firing pin while you're doing dry fire practice, so that it will protect the chamber and firing pin from any kind of damage. So I now have it in single action mode. There's minimal take up, and then a nice crisp break that comes in and around the 5-pound territory. And then if I cycle it, it's got a decent reset. There's that first click, you got a little further to that second solid click, and then you're right on the wall, and then you break again. Now, of course, since the gun didn't cycle, it's in double action mode. Double action mode has a longish trigger, but it's very, very smooth, and it's actually relatively light. It comes in around 7 pounds for a double action trigger, quite nice. Now let's go to the PPKS, which I'll also use snap caps on. This one here, similar take up, similar nice crisp break in single action mode, but it's a little bit heavier, about a pound heavier at 6 pounds, which isn't significant. Now the fact that it just malfunctioned with snap caps is nothing to hold against the gun. These are not really in perfect spec. Snap caps tend to be problematic on many guns, so I do have one in the chamber. So I'm going to have to start over again with that one. Load up 2 snap caps so that I can cycle it again. These are not meant for function testing, really. They're meant for protecting the firing pin, so they're not exactly the most reliable cycling rounds. So you wouldn't hold the fact that it didn't work properly with snap caps against any gun. So I'm going to break it. Okay, this isn't working. There it goes. But I was able to hold it. These snap caps are ornery sometimes. I'm going to let out. Notice that it didn't really click or give you any indication that you were at the reset, but it did stop pretty much right on the wall. I let off to find how far it would go, and you'll notice the trigger stopped and my finger kept going. And then again, another crisp break. Now at this point I don't have to cycle it to do the next test. We're in double action mode. The trigger is very heavy. It's a little bit shorter than the Bersa, but it's very heavy. It comes in around 13 pounds. So that's one area where the Bersa really is superior to the Walther or the PPKS, in that the double action mode is actually quite nice. Kind of reminds me, on the Bersa, kind of reminds me of the cars and some of the others that have a very, very nice double action trigger. So if you're looking for the nicest trigger, you're actually going to get that in the less expensive gun. The next step would be to take them apart and show you some of the internal differences. So I'm going to remove the magazine, get rid of these snap caps. Okay, I'll do the Bersa first because I happen to have that one in my hand at the moment. Put the safety in this fire position. You don't want it to accidentally try to decock itself while you're taking it apart. And of course you would have already checked to make sure that it's clear. And what you would do with this one is the easiest way to do it is lock it back. And then grab a hold of it, pull it back a little bit further, push down on this lever, and pull it back and lift at the same time. Now when you get to this point, it hangs up. And it'll actually, if you try to push, I don't care how hard you push, it's not going to come off. You have to actually pull it back and up a little bit, and you almost feel like you're going to bend something. And so you want to be real careful with it and just kind of wiggle back and forth. You saw me just pull it up a little bit and wiggle till it comes free. You don't want to really torque it, but if you just sit there and push forward, you're not going to go anywhere. And really what you're doing is you're clearing this and then that piece at the front here all kind of at the same time. So there's like one little window of opportunity for it to come off. Overall though, that's fairly easy because your hand is here, your finger is here. So it's really easy to just take it off with the two hands in one kind of fluid motion once you get used to it. And there are no tools required. Both of these guns have a fixed barrel, but let me go ahead and get the other one apart. It'll be easier to do a comparison if they're both apart. Now this one is a little bit different. Number one, there's no way to easily lock it back. And number two, the way you take this apart is to lift the trigger guard and set it on the frame. And you can do it on either side, but you'll notice that as soon as I touch it, it pops back. That can be a bit of a hassle as you're doing it. And then you want to grab a hold of it, keep your fingers away from the trigger because you don't want to drop the hammer on the frame, and of course have this one on fire as well. Pull it back up and off. The only thing you'll notice is that it just slides right off. So once you get it up and off, it just comes right off. So if we look at the frames, you'll see that the slide stop slide release mechanism is different. The barrels are almost a blatant clone of each other when you look at the setup of those. So if you were just looking at that piece, you'd pretty much come to the conclusion they're a clone. The magazine releases are in similar locations, but not exactly the same. And the slide guides are a little bit different, but fundamentally in the same location. If you look down at the fire control group, there's noticeable differences. The fire control group is set up completely different on the two guns. And at this point I've got the PPKs on top in my top hand and the Bersas in the bottom hand. And they both have the integrated frame rail and the 1911-ish style flange on the barrel. So there are definite similarities, and that's where I go to the conclusion that the engineers who designed this had at least seen the PPK or PPKs. Here's the frame, or I'm sorry, the slide. They're similar, especially towards the front, and when you look at the breech face, they're very similar. Zoom in a little bit. And then the firing pin guide is open on the PPKs, whereas it's a solid block. This is more consistent with most other guns. This open style is not as popular. You'll notice the PPKs does not have the drop safety piston that exists in the Bersa, so there's an upgraded safety capabilities on the Bersa. And the design of the striker block, safety mechanism, and pivot pin are a little bit different. And this pin on the PPKs also acts as a loaded chamber indicator. It protrudes out the back here. Right there. In fact, I can actually demonstrate that. I reach in there and push it. You'll see it pop out. Reassembly is equally easy and equally quirky. So we'll talk about the PPKs first. The big quirk with this is when you're going to put it back together, if you touch this, it's going to pop off. But you line it up, and I see I just did it. I touched it while I was doing it. So you'll have to pick it up and pull it again, and you want to just make sure that you stay away from it. You pull it back. Now one of the things this one likes to do that makes it also quirky is this will pop out. And if this pops out, then it'll hang up trying to put it back together. So this is almost one of those guns that you need 3 hands to try to put back together because of the little bitty quirks on it. I'm going to try turning it this way. There, I got it all the way back. And then you release this, and then you sometimes have to play with it a little bit, just like the Bersa, to get it to go back together. Now it's back together and operational. Now the Bersa doesn't have that little annoyance with the trigger guard, but this one sometimes will hang up wanting to go on. This time I got it just right. Pull it back, push down on that with your finger, let go of it, and the same thing to kind of wiggle it a little bit and get back together. As blowback guns go, it's not a bad disassembly procedure. Many blowback guns require pins to be punched out or special little tools to push in on releases and stuff like that. These are completely toolless. Overall, I would say the Bersa with this setup is easier to do overall than the trigger guard thing, because it's positive. Once I push down on this, I've got a good grip on the gun. I can push on this, and there's nothing that's just sitting someplace waiting to be touched. This, with the trigger guard being kind of touchy and the slide stop slide release popping out, overall is not quite as easy to do from a maintenance perspective. So in summary, we've got two very similar guns, one definitely kind of based at least conceptually on the other, but different in a number of ways. Fundamentally price, 300-ish, 700-ish, and of course it'll vary a little bit depending on what you get. Much nicer trigger in the Bersa, but nothing's going to really beat the cachet of being the Bond gun. So if you're looking for something that's functional, you're going to carry it, it's going to be a weapon that you're going to put in service as a service gun, the Bersa might actually be a good choice. A lot of bang for the buck on this. If you're looking for something that's really nice to look at, that has a little bit of history behind it, and a little bit of uniqueness, then the PPKS kind of comes into play. And I don't know how the new one will actually work, regarding reliability and dependability when it finally gets out there. But lots and lots of these were made. This particular one, we did have to replace the springs in it. The springs had worn just because it's old. It's 20 plus years old. So the springs had kind of lost their tension. That's something that any gun over time is going to do. You're going to replace springs. But beyond that, both of them are good quality guns, well manufactured. Bersa is a little easier to shoot well. The PPK seemed to smack a little bit less than the Bersa, probably because of the weight. Neither one's going to be a bad choice. They're just both quite interesting looking guns. Beyond that, if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, click that bell up top if you do to get notified when we put out a new video. And thank you to our YouTube subscribers and Patreon supporters for supporting the channel. Thank you.